Genghis Khan, Conquests of Love and War. And welcome to Nostalgia, a chronological exploration of every NES game released in North America. I'm Mike.
And I'm Sean. It's just us.
Yes, just us and Koei, who insists on porting their grand strategy games to the NES with their third entry in the... is this a franchise? They're all like different franchises.
I'm gonna call it a franchise. It seems to be based on like the same systems and bones, and it's the same people. So yeah,
It's just funny because like Romance of Three Kingdom got like 13 games. Nobunaga's Ambition is going to get a sequel. I believe Genghis Khan's going to get a sequel. So then are those sequels also part of this franchise? This is like it's very confusing stuff.
all right. So let's not call it a franchise. Let's call it a family.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, how there are a bunch of Hardys and there's also a bunch of Carl's Juniors, but they are basically the same. I think that's how that would work.
I thought Hardy's and like, oh no, wait, I'm thinking of Rallies and Checkers.
Maybe I'm thinking of Rallies and Checkers.
Yeah, I've actually only ever been to Checkers out of the four we've listed. Is Carl's Jr.'s any good?
I don't know. I've never been there.
You went to California recently, In-N-Out Burger?
In-N-Out Burger is a place I've been to.
It's good. That's good. I've had that.
I've liked it. I like burgers, mostly.
Burgers, especially on the fast food variety, but you know what? Fast food and these kinds of games are very similar because whether you go to McDonald's, Burger King, or even something fancy like In-N-Out, where it's like, oh, we're exclusive to the West Coast, like come find us. No matter where you go, you're getting the same burger, right? It's got all the same elements, and yes, the cheeseburger mostly tastes the same, except for like, you know, the patented bun strategy of like how much sugar they're allowed to put into their buns that somehow stay well.
Seeds.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what Koei's doing here is like their slogan is they supply the past and you make the history, but they're just supplying you the past piecemeal. Like they're saying like, okay, now play as the Mongols. Okay, now play as China. Now play as Japan. They're not giving us the past all at once, and they're not really doing much to change it. So whether I'm in Japan or China or now with the Mongol Empire, I don't know. I'm not really feeling the differences.
Yeah, I mean, there's some base level mechanics that are changing here based on whatever game we've played that sort of fits with the theme of whatever time period they're trying to cover. I can't really focus on which ones like Romance did that was different than that was different than Nobunaga, but this one seems to have changed the most. And at this level, it's almost like we're trying to tell the difference between like Madden games from year to year because their systems are so similar.
Yeah, that's a good point, Sean. Maybe a more like apt or gaming analysis would have been like the Monopoly games that are, every single one is like, oh, they just changed what Boardwalk is, right? To like whatever that franchise or IP is. But then occasionally you get one that has like in the manual, if you bother to read it, it's like special fun rules that like they try to tie into the IP. So this way it's more like that. And it's like, no one really reads that, so you could just play it the same way and not notice any of the differences. But if you do go the extra step and find out that like, oh, in the Simpsons version it does this, but in the New York Mets Monopoly version it does this. That's not true, by the way. I don't think either one of those do anything different. I own both.
I was going to ask if the New York Mets was real.
I'm playing the same game both times, and that's kind of what I feel like, regardless of like the little changes. But there is
Boardwalk
changes.
Just Mike Piazza as like a person? It's just like him?
I think it's actually, I think it would be Shea Stadium at the time, which makes sense, right?
Oh,
like
okay.
you make the actual stadium that you play at the final destination.
Okay,
But Mike Piazza's
just
probably like in the greens, the greens are valuable.
Yeah. All right.
Genghis Khan though does make changes though, Sean, and you're right. I'm not fully giving it the credit that it's due because it actually adds, unlike what Nobunaga was doing, where it was like, hey, you can play as like six of the territories, or you can play as all 50 something of the territories. This one actually takes the time to be like, no, the two modes are actually going to be something kind of different, where like Mongol conquest, which starts in like the year 1175, that's like a one-player mode where you must play as a specific lord and conquer a specific set of territories, and it's not super linear or anything, but you know what to expect and can get better at playing that very specific version.
Yeah.
Whereas like World Conquest or any of the other, Nobunaga's Ambition or Romance of the Three Kingdoms, that's more of the grand strategy, like anything can possibly happen. There's no way to keep track of like what country 35 is doing. You just gotta hope that when you get there, you're the stronger army.
I wouldn't say that Mongol conquest is any easier than world conquest, but it definitely is smaller in scope, so it can almost be seen as like a dry run or as just like a tutorial.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, that's the only mode I really checked out for this game because it was a little more accessible to the point where this is the first time I was able to go on Game FAQs and actually get a guide that I could understand and like sort of mimic. And yeah, the turns wouldn't work out exactly the same way, so it wasn't like I was playing someone else's game verbatim, but at least I had a good starting point of like, all right, make treaties with these guys, build your army for this size. Like, that's great because that's the kind of thing you can't anticipate in World Conquest because you don't know what the surrounding armies are going to even like be, what their base stats are going to be, or what kind of army they're going to turn out to be, or whether they're even going to focus on building an army, or whether you could just steamroll them later. Like, that's hard to find out in the World Conquest mode.
Yeah, I think, again, one of my biggest problems with this series has been how opaque the stats are, and I know that we played 3 of them, and you'd think that I'd have enough like time with them by now that I can kind of get some relationships between stats that just make sense, but I still am not there. But what I would say, like, what I mean by that is like, I don't know how many troops is enough to think, okay, I can go to war now, because like 50 something might look like a high number to me, but then I'll go to war and it's like, oh, he's already got like 2,000 troops or something. But what I will say about Mongol Conquest is the map is a lot easier to digest and kind of like keep a mental image in your head. Like, you can see that there's sort of like a choke point in territories right in the middle. So you kind of want to consolidate on one side before you move over to the other, just to like minimize the amount of lines in battle you might have, or enemies that want to like attack your flank. So I will say that it's easier to think tactically on the grandest scale in Mongolian conquest.
And also, you're able to make 3 decisions on the kinds of things you want to do with your empire per turn, which is great because, in the past, it's like everybody makes a move and then everybody makes a move and then everybody makes a move. This time, it's almost like, first I'm going to train my troops. Then I'm going to try to sign a treaty with these people, and then if they don't sign it, I'm going to freaking fight them. Like, you don't have to wait all those turns to find out what's going to happen next.
Yeah, it also kind of, because when it's just one move per turn order, I feel like becomes a problem because you can only do one thing, obviously. So if for some reason country 12 goes before country 13, country 12 has an advantage. Now that you can kind of just like weight your priorities, like you can do the 3 things that you meant to do in those 3 cycles, but now they're all happening concurrently, and you can think a bit more. To me, it just feels a bit more leveled out because of that.
You made me think of, and I don't know if the original Risk board game does this, but certainly the computer version of Risk that I played growing up did, and more famously the board game Diplomacy, which can only ruin friendships, never restore them.
Yes.
Those those games have a way so that like you decide your moves, the computers or fellow opponents decide their moves, and then they're all executed like at once. And there's some contradictions that have to be like worked out, or some conflicts that need to be fought because you chose to fight this army, but then this army invaded you, and it's like, well, that's what you decided. Like those kind of things work out. It is interesting that like for a thing that's trying to like simulate history, the idea of like going in turns doesn't necessarily like it doesn't work, and at the very least it should probably be random. The turns, like after each turn should be like a random drawing of like who goes next after everybody's gone.
Yeah, and I guess in a single player game it may as well be sort of like that concurrent execution, and then whatever gets priority is random. But because like the computer, you can't see what the computer's doing, so it might have incomplete information on you have incomplete information on them. But when you get to the 4-player game, when you're in world conquest, then that's kind of when that would take a bigger, it would cause a larger issue, I guess.
And because these games, especially from Koei, are treated like historical fiction, is there a case for the historical nonfiction, or rather historically accurate mode, where like everybody else other than you does behave as expected, and you can just choose to, use that history knowledge to either watch it unfold or take advantage of it and rewrite history?
Well, I know that in some Paradox games, it's a lot harder in something like Crusader Kings, when there are hundreds of agents. But in something like Hearts of Iron, which is just like a simulation of World War II, there's only like 100 or so different countries that have their own AI. There's a checkbox before you start a game that you can either check or uncheck that determines whether the AI will behave as they did in real life to the best of its ability, considering how you change your behavior as opposed to the actual country. Or you can just have it be random. And I really don't know if any of that is in this game. Like if the AIs have predetermined routines that you are interacting with, or if everyone just sort of has the same personality across the board. I'm not really sure.
And it'd be interesting if, in history, territories 5 and 6, which are they're not actually next to each other. That's another thing, just real quick, because we were talking about this in our Clash of Demon Head episode, that like the numbers for the routes weren't concurrent, so it wasn't like 1, then 2, then 3. It's also like that in this map. Like, why not just make it so that it just goes from left to right, territory 1, 2, 3, 4. Instead, it's like they're kind of near each other.
It's like serpentine.
They don't touch, yeah.
Yeah, it starts from like one corner, and then it goes to the left, and then to the right, and to the left. It can be confusing, because then it'll be like, this country has ordered you to give this plot of land to them, or to make them a vassal. And by the time I'm at the screen that is telling me that this country is telling me to do this, I don't know who's actually threatening me, because it's just giving you a number, and I don't have the map memorized.
Yeah, and then to round out my point there is just that if it was historically accurate, that like territories 5 and 6 had like a peace agreement in real life, that like, yeah, they shouldn't fight in the game, or at least there should be a checkbox for that, like what you were suggesting with Hearts of Iron.
Yeah.
Now, arguably the easiest way to win this game, and there is no easy way to win this game, but it would be to master the thing that has annoyed me the most about this game ever since Nobunaga's Ambition, and the thing they really refuse to fix, and fix in a meaningful way. I'm not talking about like, yeah, they make quality of life improvements, but they need to revamp the combat in general. And the combat in this game is something that, like, if you understand it and you know how to use the numbers to your advantage and where to be on those maps and how to fight, you're going to steamroll the opponents, because it's all about, just having a larger army and conquering smaller territories to eventually conquer everything. That's where I struggle with this game. I feel like even though it's close to a turn-based strategy game, it's not that. And I can't do that. So, while I think that that's the easiest solution, a lot of people would argue also that there's this whole market manipulation thing that you have to understand, and that that's the real way to win, where, like, once you get to spring, that's the time to sell off all your items and get a lot of gold. And then when you get to winter, that's when you buy back everything you need for the following season, so that this way you always have exactly what you need and can anticipate the quantity of your army, your people, your taxes, and so on and so forth. That's more exciting to me than the combat, and that means that something's probably wrong with the combat.
Yeah, well, okay, let me just again describe, I think, in a bit more articulate way what I don't understand about, like, the overarching economic and, like, overview tactical level of this game. In any other strategy game like this, I kind of get the gist of how to scale and how to get that positive feedback loop of growth going. But in this, I went to war, I beat the guy, took his land, and now I've got a barely defended, now 2 plots of land that I guess I have to wait till the next year to get more troops unless I want to hire some more, but my gold reserves are down because I used it all to fight the war, and I guess I can sell some food, but then again, I don't know how much is going to be taken during the next season, so I don't want to mess with that too much. So you end up in a way where, like, in something like Civilization or like a Crusader Kings again, or like one of these Paradox games, you can kind of have an idea of how to extrapolate how to get from where your resources are currently to where they are in the future. And I was just a chicken with my head cut off. I didn't know what I was doing with it. The combat, while it is jank, I at least understood what attrition would be walking through woods, and the 8 directions or the 6 directions you can go. Choosing between those is kind of wonky, but I understood what you're supposed to do, and if you end up next to an enemy, you won't be able to move any further, and I understood that different areas had different offensive and defensive buffs, and I got that. That was understood to me. Everything else was not.
Arguably the most interesting aspect of the Mongol conquest thing, if you can get to it, is that once you do conquer every territory, then a screen presents you with the information that the real battle is about to begin, and you just load into the world conquest mode, but with your stats from the Mongol conquest mode. So I think, like, that's a real, like, whoa moment, like an aha thing to happen to somebody who manages to get far enough in Mongol conquest to then import their save into the grander game. That's just crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I had a weird feeling of just like, oh, this is like Spore, but actually impressive when you get to that threshold, because in Spore you go from, oh, you're just a thing, and then, oh, now you're a tribe, and oh, now you're a nation state, and now you're the whole world, and just that expansion of scope over time. I like that idea, and I've always when I was a kid, I'd be like, oh, it'd be really cool if, like, The Sims tied into Sim City, tied into, like, a nation running game. Like, that'd be so cool as a simulation. I knew it wasn't really feasible, but when you nail it down to just like, okay, consolidating the Mongol Empire to then becoming the Mongol Empire and trying to conquer the world, I guess when you nail it down a bit more, you can actually implement that.
Right. And then the equivalent for that would be if there was a way to hook up, like, 2 NESs, so that I had Genghis Khan in mine, and you had Romance of the Three Kingdoms in yours, and then I was able to take my final file from Genghis Khan and your final file from Romance of the Three Kingdoms, and we duke it out based on our empires. Like, that would be what that is. And I think that's the kind of stuff that makes, like, we're not supposed to talk about these games, but like Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles, like the fact that it does open up and then you put the other cartridge on top, like, wow, what a time to be alive for something like that to happen. And that's not even like a grand strategy game. That's just a platformer that gets some extra levels.
No, that is funny. I didn't make that connection.
You have to assess if that's worth it, though, right? Like playing all of Mongol Conquest and then saying, like, yeah, no, I haven't had enough. I'll definitely keep going and now conquer the world. Like, I guess you have to be Genghis Khan himself to really have that kind of thirst, right? To say, I'm going to keep going. It wasn't enough.
I mean, I think if you've gotten to the point where you actually won Mongol Conquest without a game FAQ, then I'd say that you'd be maybe not blown away because, you saw that the other version was an option at the beginning of the game, but you'd be interested in continuing.
But you don't have to play as Genghis Khan in the World Conquest mode. In the Mongol Conquest, you have to play as Lord Temujin, but in World Conquest, you can either be Genghis Khan, who represents the Mongols, Alexios I of Byzantine, Richard of England, or Yorimoto of Japan. And I feel like it's pretty interesting that, like, I don't know if those are exactly the world players or if that's just, like, what they had in mind to make it a more interesting game. Like, boiling it down to 4, like, the world? Come on.
I think they sort of lumped in a bunch of leaders that were active more or less within a couple hundred years of each other. I don't really think that they all got together and decided, like, all right, it is now a conquer the world competition between the 4 of us. You must begin in the year 1206 or something like that.
Right.
But yeah, it is weird because, we're used to in this series, everyone kind of almost being at a level playing field, having like one province, and then it just sort of organically blobs, and then you'll get empires out of nothing, and some will disappear within the first few years. And so this feels a lot more structured when you just have these 4 mega empires and they just sort of pick on the little guys. But at least it's, it's one of those differences, and so it's not just like a reskin.
Yeah, that's true. Even if the grander game doesn't necessarily change, right? Like no system, no additional systems are added, or there's no new politics because it's the world stage instead of just your local territory versus territory. So, it evolves a little bit, but really it's just a longer, larger map. It's not necessarily a different game than playing the Mongol Conquest. Although this time the type of role play you could do might be different if you choose to be as far out as England as opposed to being the Mongols.
Yeah, it would be cool to see if there were any actual mechanical differences between these 4 empires. Like, if even something that could just be tweaking numbers, like having, like the English have longbowmen and the Mongols have a special kind of cavalry unit, or just something like that. Because really, they're just different portraits and different flags, and I guess different name lists that it generates children for you from. It doesn't really feel like different civilizations colliding.
Right. It's almost like, you could play as the Japanese, but because of their location, it's kind of difficult to play as them. So it's actually just like a difficulty setting, not necessarily like they behave differently, which is more of a civilization, especially like Civ 4, when you start like being able to choose your leader and getting that leader's stats and that nation's perks and stuff like that. That's more of that kind of game.
Yeah.
But so Koei wasn't like, on the up and up with that kind of stuff. They needed other people to innovate for them. But it is interesting that, like, there is some kind of difficulty curve based on, who you choose.
Yeah, is there... Did you play as Japan, or did you play
I didn't touch World Conquest, actually.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I just figured...
I actually don't know if there'd be another, like... If they have to cross a strait to get to the mainland. I thought maybe that would add something to that, but I think if I'm remembering right, they just act as if it's just another, province or another land to move from or move to.
Right.
Crossing that water doesn't really play a factor.
Yeah, and instead it actually it does the risk thing the board game risk, where certain areas are just great because they have such great defensive holdouts, where, if you can conquer Australia and the Philippines, you can just build your massive army out from there and then send them forward, because nobody can figure out the technology to send boats from Madagascar or boats from Peru or anything like that in order to get over to you.
Yeah, it has that natural, just you're in the corner, you don't have to watch your back.
And I think it would have been Chile was what I was looking for, not Peru, right?
Sure. I mean, one or the other.
One or the other. Yeah, they're next to
countries.
each other, so I guess it works. I was thinking the most southern South American country, which I'm not sure is Chile either though. Is Argentina technically a little more south? Who gets the final thing? It was funny when I was in Hawaii, there was a bakery all the way at the southernmost point that advertised itself as the southernmost bakery in Hawaii, and I was like, southernmost bakery in America, and I was like, is that really a selling point? Is this bakery going to taste any better because it's the southernmost bakery?
It would be Chile if you're thinking of the southernmost point in South America.
There you go. And also, risk people, if you're listening, add Antarctica. It's time.
Yeah, we're going to be living there soon.
I don't know why we keep talking about board games in this episode, but I don't know if you remember, Sean, in college, we did play Risk Space, which was just Risk on Earth, but maybe a little futuristic tech and stuff, but then also had the moon as a map as well that you could try to conquer, and we put that we put that in another room so that you actually had to travel to the moon if you wanted to do anything there.
I don't remember having to move to a different room.
Yeah, no, we put it in my apartment room, and the board game was in the kitchen.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, we should do that again.
All right. Why not? Sounds great. And we'll invite all the Discord listeners as well. Not that you can listen to these episodes directly on Discord. You have to. Yeah, you guys know what you have to do by now, right? I tell you at the end of every episode, so you know. Unless you're not listening to the end of the episode. It's not the end of the episode, actually, because we haven't done a few things.
Oh.
Most importantly, I haven't told you that the people who make Mountain Blade, that whole series of games, they say that Genghis Khan was the influence for the beginning of that series. And I needed to tell you that, because that's the only kind of background developer insight I could get for Genghis Khan.
That's interesting. I did play Mountain Blade very briefly before, again, I got dissuaded by the complex mechanics that I guess I just didn't have time to learn. But I have other friends that have a lot of fun with that series, yeah.
How much of citing it to Genghis Khan, though, comes from the fact that, they finally got a good title on one of these games? Nobunaga sounds foreign, so people probably wouldn't just go pick that up if they don't necessarily know who he is or weren't into Japanese culture. Romance of the Three Kingdoms sounds like a JRPG, if I'm being honest, but it also just seems like it could be some sappy game that, because it has romance in it, kids aren't going to be interested in it. And so Genghis Khan is finally that epic historical guy who tried to kill everybody and breed all the others. That's who I want to. That's who I want to play as. That's the kind of game I want to be. And yeah, you might not even know that it's going to be this grand strategy game. You might think this is going to be some Ninja Gaiden action game where you're just you screwing shit up, but instead, you get a history lesson. You take it to your social studies teacher, figure out what do I do with this game?
Yeah, I think that actually my favorite title in this series is Romance of the Three Kingdoms. I didn't know about the book before we recorded the episode. I just thought it was a pretty awesome title. But I will say that, when I was reading about these games in PSM Magazine and IGN and whatever, I did think it was an adult game for adults and it wouldn't be fun. But, now that I'm older, it's just a really cool, wow.
Right. And I think at another scale, it could be Romance of the Three Kingdoms sounds like a soap opera. Could have been right after, One Day, One Life to Live or All My
One Life,
Children.
yeah.
Yeah. Romance
world
of the Three
turns.
Kingdoms.
Yeah.
Sappy stuff. On the sequels and spin-off side, we did mention that there will be a Genghis Khan 2. It's called Genghis Khan 2, Clan of the Grey Wolf. And that comes out in 1993 for, get a load of this, the NES and the Super Nintendo at the same time. So are they the same game? Are we just going to be playing the dumbed down version? Should we check out the Super Nintendo version at the same time to make that episode a little interesting? I don't know. We'll cross that bridge when we get there, right?
Yeah.
But this isn't even the first Genghis Khan game. The first Genghis Khan game, it's a bunch of Chinese letters that I'm not sure I'm going to get right, so I'm not even going to try to say it or whatever, but it doesn't look like it has Genghis Khan in the title. It looks like the literal translation is Blue Wolves and White Does, which, again, sounds like a Romance of the Three Kingdoms thing.
Well, the thing at the beginning of the manual, and I guess also there's a little text box at the beginning of the game, does say that, a wolf and a doe were like a king and queen of Mongolia, and then, divine right happens. So, I mean, at least it thematically makes sense.
Okay, so look, if you look at it, you got Blue Wolves and White Does is technically Genghis Khan 1, and then Genghis Khan 1 is just Genghis Khan 2, and then Genghis Khan 2, Clan of the Grey Wolf, should be Genghis Khan 3, so it makes sense that when they finally, in 1999, PlayStation released Genghis Khan 4, there were no questions about where 3 was, because everybody knew that 3 was 2.
Okay. Wait, so what was the first one?
First one is Blue Wolves and White Does.
And what was that released on?
That was released in 1985 for the PC 98, PC 88, and the MZ 2500. I swear they're fucking with us sometimes with these things. Like, they just throw on a couple extra letters, and it's a brand new computer that only was released in New Zealand. I don't know. It would come to the MSX though, and that's a console that we're more familiar with.
Okay, and it's just this game again.
Well, theoretically, yeah, but it's the inferior version because it doesn't have the same graphical fidelity or features because it's the first entry.
Yeah.
But we're not here to talk about the first version or the fourth version or whatever other numbers they want to throw at us. We're here to talk about Genghis Khan 2, which is 1. All right, I'm beating this joke to death. We're here to talk about Genghis Khan and whether it belongs on the Essential Games list. Even though Koei keeps making these games, I don't think at the time they were doing anything wrong by switching very little between the versions. And in fact, Genghis Khan is without a doubt the best version yet because of the turn system, but also the ability to play a single player mode that's maybe a little more straightforward and guided very loosely, of course. The reason why these games keep getting knocked off the Essential Games list, though, is that there's nothing missing in later grand strategy games that's presented here. So really, you're just getting the minimal experience of any kind of grand strategy game you can experience today, but even probably just 5 years later. So whether it's a game as grand as Stellaris or something more linear like Civilization, and linear, obviously, that's depending on how you play, but those games offer so much more than the kind of rewriting history that Koei wants you to believe is happening with Genghis Khan, that today these games are really nothing more than textbook examples for people to go back to understand how the games that we have today that have so many of these features built upon them several times over, where they started from. So there's nothing here to gain for a player who's already having a great time with some of today's examples. Sean.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still impressed that these games exist. That still hasn't worn off. I think I said it in Nobunaga. I just didn't think before we played them that this was really a thing that they could do. But it's still a very unhappy experience to play these, really. Between all the quality of life improvements that I can think of right off the bat, booting it up, but just not knowing the names of anything and not having any context when you're interacting with different provinces or countries or whatever, and all these numbers that don't really equate to anything other than more numbers. Yeah, I agree. Nothing but improvements have come in grand strategy. There's nothing that's been lost. It's just what's here is what's here. So no, it's not essential.
Right. Not an essential game. Not that these can't be essential games. We're going to continue to give them a shot. As I mentioned, we'll have Genghis Khan 2 to look forward to, or not. It depends on how tired you are of getting with these episodes. We promise eventually Joe will join us for his thoughts as well. He's been noticeably absent on these 3 Koei games, but it's just a random coincidence. Not that he's avoiding these kinds of games. And nobody should be avoiding any kinds of games because we're going to have so many more coming up. We have Infiltrator, Kings of the Beach, The Magic of Shahrazad, and then our Nostalgia Bites episodes too. We just released All Night Nippon Super Mario Brothers, which is not just the Super Mario Brothers ROM hack-ish style game where there's DJs coming out of the warp pipes instead of piranha plants. If that sounds interesting, check it out. But we also covered a lot of other Super Mario Brothers games in that. And we're going to continue to cover weird games that only ever got to the Famicom that are accessible without any Japanese knowledge. You can look forward to Biomiracle, Captain Tsubasa, the soccer game that I think now is starting to come over to North America, but it started as early as the Famicom. Chaos World, I don't even know what that one's about, but again, these are all things to look forward to. And we hope you look forward to them with us because we're going to keep doing this podcast every Friday. If you have any thoughts in the meantime, you can write it to us on the website. There's a contact form that gets you directly to me, or you can just tweet at me. I'm Michael Esposito. You can find me at Esposito Film on Twitter, and we'll talk to you soon.